He had one jacket between them. He gave it to her. That was the kind of man Nathan Cole was. Not a man who made speeches, not a man who announced things, just a man who did the quiet thing, the right thing, and kept walking. Even when the rain was coming down so hard, it blurred the streetlights into something soft and orange. Even when his shirt was soaked through before the end of the first block. Even when he was 34 years old, running on 4 hours of sleep and down to his last $62 after a double shift that had left his shoulders feeling like someone had filled them with wet sand. He just gave his daughter the jacket and kept walking. Maya was 7 years old and small for her age. She had her father's dark eyes and a habit she'd picked up from somewhere of tilting her head to one side when she was thinking hard about something. She walked beside him with both hands tucked under his arm, pressing close the way she did when something felt too big and too cold and too much. She didn't complain. She never complained. And that was the thing about Maya that broke Nathan's heart a little every single time he thought about it. She was 7 years old, and she already understood in some wordless and bone-deep way that complaining cost something, so she didn't do it. Their truck had broken down 3 blocks from Frank's apartment. Frank was 71, a retired mail carrier who lived across the hall, and had somewhere along the way become the person Maya stayed with on the evenings Nathan worked late. He had a television that got too loud, and a cat named Biscuit, and a bowl of hard candy on the coffee table that Maya was allowed exactly 2 pieces of. A rule both of them pretended was strict. Frank never asked for anything in return. Nathan paid him anyway, quietly. In groceries left outside his door on Sundays, and small repairs handled without being asked. The truck had been giving him signs for weeks. A cough on cold mornings, a shudder at certain speeds, a smell faint and chemical that came and went and made Nathan think things he couldn't afford to think. He'd been saving for the repair. That moment kept not arriving. Tonight the truck coughed, once shuddered twice, and simply stopped. He called a tow. Earliest they could come was morning. The mechanic told him 2 days minimum. Nathan did the math in his head while standing in the rain on the side of the road, phone to his ear, watching a car splash through a puddle near his boot. The math didn't come out well. It never did. So he walked. He walked the 6 blocks to Frank's apartment, collected. Maya helped her into her coat, pulled her hood up against the rain. Then he tucked his jacket around her shoulders, and they started home. 12 minutes on a dry evening. Longer tonight. Maya matched her steps to his, the way she always did, like she had calibrated herself to his exact frequency. He thought walking about the medication. Maya had been born with a small irregularity in her heart, nothing catastrophic. Managed carefully with monthly medication and regular checkups. The medication cost $60 a month, even with his insurance. Some months he moved numbers around in his head for days before he found a version that worked. Last month, it had taken him 6 days. He hadn't told Maya. He hadn't told anyone. He just moved the numbers until they added up. Then he moved on to the next thing. That was the life. Not a bad life. Not a life without love or laughter or the particular sweetness of watching your daughter fall asleep mid-sentence while you were reading to her. But a life with no margin. A life where the broken truck and the medication and the missed shift and the $62 all lived in the same very small space and had to be managed constantly and quietly by a man who had gotten very good at not letting it show. His neighbor Frank had once told him he had never heard Nathan raise his voice. Not at Maya, not on the phone, not even during the 11 days in February when the building's heat broke and Nathan had just gone to the thrift store, bought a space heater, wrapped Maya in 2 sweaters and a blanket, and gone back to work. Nathan had shrugged when Frank said it. What was the alternative, he said. Frank had looked at him for a long moment after that. The kind of look that meant something but didn't say it. What Nathan never talked about, what he kept in the part of himself he only visited late at night when Maya was asleep, was how tired he was. Not physically, tired in a deeper way. The way a person gets tired when they've been carrying something heavy for a long time and have stopped being able to remember what it felt like to put it down. The rain had started as a drizzle. It became something else entirely over the span of about 4 minutes. By the time they reached the long stretch of Carver Road, the gutters were running fast, and the streetlights were turning the wet pavement into something almost beautiful if you weren't the person walking through it in a soaked shirt. Nathan moved quickly, head down, counting intersections. He heard the sound before he saw anything. A sharp metallic crack, then a grinding noise from somewhere ahead, low and wrong, then the hiss of a car coming to a hard and unplanned stop. He reached out instinctively and pulled Maya close against his side. When he looked up, he saw it. A silver SUV resting at a bad angle against the steel guardrail at the bend in the road. Not wrecked, not on fire, but wrong. The engine was still running. The driver's door hung open. No skid marks, no second vehicle, no explanation. Just the car, the open door, and the rain. Then he saw her. A woman had made it about 12 feet from the vehicle before her legs gave out. She went down sideways onto the wet pavement. One hand pressed hard against her right thigh. Her hair plastered flat against the side of her face. She wasn't moving. Nathan stopped. He stood completely still for 2 full seconds. His brain ran the calculation the way it always did. Fast, practical, slightly cold. He had a 7-year-old beside him in the rain. He had $62 to his name. He had a broken truck, a missed shift rent in 9 days, and medication due the week after that. Stopping meant a night that got much longer and much harder. He knew this. 4 cars passed without slowing. A 5th slowed slightly, then kept going. Nathan was still standing there. And then Maya looked up at him. She looked up at him from beneath her rain-soaked hood, water running off the edge of it in a thin, steady stream. And she said it, in the flat, certain tone she used when something was just simply true. Dad. We can't walk past her. Not a question. Not a request. Not even a plea. Just a fact. The kind of fact a 7-year-old says out loud, because she hasn't learned yet that adults sometimes need time to talk themselves into things they already know. And Nathan moved. He crossed the road at a jog. He crouched down beside the woman and shielded her from the worst of the downpour with his body. She was conscious, but only barely. Her breathing was too shallow. Her face had gone the kind of pale that doesn't come from cold alone. Dark staining was spreading from a wound on her right thigh. Something from the car's frame had caught her when she pushed the door open. Nathan took the jacket off Maya's shoulders. He pressed it against the wound. Firm. Steady. Without hesitating. Can you hear me? He said. What's your name? She blinked. Her lips moved. Claire. She managed. He tried her phone. Cracked screen. No signal. He used his own to call emergency services. 30-minute wait. He looked at the wound. He looked at the blood already soaking through the jacket. Then he looked at Maya. She was standing very still in the rain, beside him, both hands wrapped around a soaked leather bag she had quietly retrieved from near the car's open door. Nobody asked her to do that. She just did it, the way she did most things. Quietly, without fanfare. He made a decision. There was a walk-in clinic on Merchant Street, less than a kilometer away. He handed Maya his phone, told her to keep redialing emergency services. Stay right beside him, not behind, beside. Then he lifted Claire, one arm under her knees, one across her back, and he started walking. She wasn't light, and he had already put in 14 hours. His shoulders were burning before the end of the first block. The rain was finding the gap in his collar and running cold down his back. Each step required more than the step before it, but he didn't stop. He didn't slow. Maya walked beside him the entire way. She was holding the bag with both hands, not swinging it, not complaining about the weight, just carrying it, because it needed to be carried. Her breathing came in quick, controlled little increments. Nathan recognized that sound. That was what Maya did when she was frightened and had privately decided not to show it. She did it at the doctor's office. She did it on the first day of school. She was doing it now, walking through the rain in the dark beside her father who was carrying a stranger. And Nathan thought about her. With every block, with every step. He thought about the morning he'd told her the cereal tasted better with less milk. And she had believed him completely. And he had stood at the kitchen counter and let out a slow breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. He thought about the way she still reached for his hand in parking lots, even though she had recently and seriously informed him that she was probably too old for that. He thought about her heart, about the medication, about the math that never came out even. He thought about what she was right now, 7 years old, walking through a rainstorm in the dark, carrying a stranger's bag, choosing not to be afraid. She was the best thing he had ever done. He didn't know how he deserved her, but he was going to keep walking until he got there. The duty nurse at the clinic came around the counter before Nathan had even finished pushing through the door. She took one look at his arms, at what he was carrying, and she moved. Within 90 seconds, Claire was on a table in the back room. A doctor appeared. The door closed. Nathan stood in the corridor. Water ran off his clothes and pooled on the linoleum in a slow spreading circle around his feet. Maya was beside him, her wet hair stuck to the side of her face, the leather bag still in her hands. He put his arm around her shoulders. She leaned into him. He answered the intake nurse's questions. Name. What happened? Time of incident. Was the patient conscious throughout? He answered what he knew. He said clearly what he didn't. When the nurse mentioned the deposit for unregistered patients, Nathan reached into his pocket. $62. He put it on the counter without being asked. He didn't explain where it was supposed to go. He just put it down. 20 minutes later, the doctor came out. You made the right call, bringing her here, he said. The laceration is deep. Another 30 minutes on that road, and the blood loss would have been a serious problem. Nathan nodded once. He asked if he could look in on her before they left. The doctor thought for a moment, then nodded. Claire was awake. More color had returned to her face. Her leg was being sutured under local anesthetic. She turned her head when Nathan stepped in and looked at him with an attention that was quiet and precise and slightly unsettling. Not the way people look when they're grateful, the way they look when they're trying to hold something still in their memory before it slips away. She raised her right hand toward him. On her wrist was a watch, slim, dark-faced, the kind of watch that cost more than Nathan made in 3 months. She began to unclasp it. No, he said. She stopped. She held his gaze. Then at least tell me your name, she said. Nathan Cole, he said. I left my number at the front desk in case they need anything for the paperwork. He went back to the waiting room. He collected Maya. He took back his phone. And he walked out into the rain. He didn't look back. But 10 minutes after he left, a dark sedan pulled up outside the clinic. 2 men in suits climbed out and pushed through the door with the particular tension of people who had been searching for something and were not fully relieved to have found it. They spoke to the woman at the front desk. Low voices, urgent. They asked about a patient. They asked who brought her in. They asked for names. The doctor came back to the desk for a chart. He looked at the 2 men for about 3 seconds. Then he said in a tone that closed the conversation that he couldn't discuss patient information with anyone who wasn't law enforcement presenting official credentials. The 2 men stepped outside to make phone calls. Inside in the back room, Claire Whitmore lay on the table with her eyes open, staring at the ceiling, thinking about a man she had never met before tonight. A man who had pressed a jacket against her wound without being asked, who had carried her a kilometer in the rain, who had put money he clearly couldn't afford on a clinic counter without hesitating, and who had said no to a $10,000 watch without even blinking. She thought about that. She kept thinking about it. Nathan didn't sleep that night. Maya had come home with a slight fever from the soaking. Nothing dangerous, just her body registering the cold and the stress of the evening. He checked on her twice in the night, gave her fever reducer at 2 a.m, stood in the doorway of her room for a long time afterward, just watching her sleep, listening to the steadiness of her breathing. By 5, he was awake for good. He sat at the kitchen table, with a mug of the coffee that went cold before he touched it. And he did the math. $62 gone. Truck repair unpaid. Shift missed at the depot. Medication due. Rent in 9 days. The numbers arranged themselves in his head, and no matter how he ordered them, they didn't add up to anything comfortable. He sat with that for a while. He was used to sitting with it. His phone rang at 6:49. Unknown number. He let it go. It rang again at 6:53. Different number. He let it go again. Then a third call. A fourth. He picked up on the fifth. Mr. Cole, a woman's voice said. Measured. Professional. The voice of someone who knew the first 30 seconds mattered. My name is Diana Walsh. I'm calling on behalf of Ms. Claire Whitmore. I understand you assisted her last night. She'd very much like the opportunity to speak with you directly if you're willing. Nathan set down the mug he hadn't been drinking from. The name meant nothing to him. He said he'd think about it and ended the call. He was pulling Maya's shoes on 20 minutes later, sitting on the floor in front of her while she ate toast, and watched him with the expression she used when she was deciding whether to ask something when the text messages started arriving. 3 in quick succession. Polite. Persistent. Please call back. This is important. Ms. Whitmore specifically asked for you. He read them twice. He had been working in delivery for 6 years. He knew what it looked like when someone wanted something from you and was being very careful about how they asked. He had just stepped outside with Maya when he stopped. A long black car was idling at the curb. Freshly washed. Not a cab, not a rideshare. The kind of car that belongs to people who don't need to think about cars. 2 people in business clothes stood beside it. One of them spotted Nathan immediately and raised a hand. Maya looked at the car, looked at Nathan, looked at the car again. Are those people here for us? She asked. The taller of the 2 introduced himself as Marcus, Claire Whitmore's chief of staff. He said it simply, like a fact. He explained the situation without condescension. Ms. Whitmore had been discharged that morning. She was resting at her private residence. She was asking Nathan to come in person, just to talk. No obligation. A car both ways. And Maya, he added, was specifically welcome. Ms. Whitmore had insisted on that last part. Nathan looked at his daughter. She was looking at him with her head tilted to one side. He went. The building was in the financial district, one of those towers that announces money not through anything flashy, but through the sheer quality of the quiet inside them. The lobby had a marble floor and a desk staffed by a woman who made no visible movement when Nathan walked in. But her eyes moved over him in about a second and a half, taking in the cleanest pair of work pants he owned, the jacket with the small bleach spot near the left pocket. He noticed her notice. He didn't say anything about it. On the 14th floor in a conference room with a long view of the river, Nathan met Claire Whitmore, properly for the first time. She was seated at the head of a long table, left leg elevated, wearing a blazer and a composed expression. Around her were several people who clearly belonged in rooms like this. Lawyers, Nathan thought, and at least one person near the door who held himself with the quiet, constant awareness of someone whose job was to notice things before they happened. Claire stood when Nathan walked in. He hadn't expected that. She said, "Thank you for coming, and please sit down before I do. My leg is making everyone in this room nervous every time I stand on it." A brief, involuntary smile moved through someone at the table, quickly contained. Nathan sat. Maya sat beside him, without being directed, hands folded in her lap, eyes moving around the room with calm, open curiosity. Over the next 40 minutes, Nathan learned who Claire Whitmore was, 38 years old, founder and CEO of Whitmore Meridian, a logistics and technology company operating across 12 states. She had built it alone, starting from a single warehouse at 24 years old with borrowed money and a total refusal to fail at something she had decided to do. The previous evening, she had been leaving a closed executive meeting that had run 4 hours over schedule. a meeting about a major acquisition she had been resisting for months. She'd been driving herself home the way she sometimes did when she needed to think without anyone watching her think. The incident on Carver Road, initial findings suggested, had not been a simple mechanical failure. Nathan listened to all of this without performing anything. No surprise. No gravity, just listening. When Claire turned to him directly and said, "I want to be clear about what you did and what it means to me," you could have kept walking. Every other car on that road did. Nathan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Your door was open and your engine was still running. I couldn't have explained to my daughter why we kept walking." Claire looked at him. Something shifted in her expression. "Not much. Just enough." "No," she said quietly. "I suppose you couldn't." She offered reimbursement. His $62 returned in full, and an additional amount 10 times what he'd put on that counter. Nathan shook his head. He'd take back the 62, not the rest. Claire didn't push, but she watched him, the same way she had in the clinic room, that precise, careful attention, like she was trying to understand something she didn't have the right framework for, like she was looking at a kind of person she had encountered before, but not quite like this. The trouble started 4 days later. An internal memo circulated through Whitmore Meridian's senior staff. Claire's head of security, a careful and methodical man named Garrett, had flagged a series of anomalies in the incident. A 12-second gap in the traffic camera footage. Claire's phone losing signal inside a strong coverage zone. An anomaly in the SUV's braking system that didn't match the physical evidence of a simple accident. The car appeared to have been interfered with. Because Nathan had been the first person to reach Claire, and because his name was in the clinic's intake records, he was asked to give a formal account to Garrett's team. He did this willingly. He sat in a small, plain office on a Thursday afternoon while Maya waited in the lobby with a cup of hot chocolate and a calm woman from HR. Nathan answered every question accurately. He described the position of the car, the road conditions, the wound, the sequence of decisions. He mentioned, without being prompted, a mailing label fragment he'd found in his jacket pocket the morning after. He'd assumed at first it was from a delivery, just a scrap of printed material that had gotten into his pocket somehow. He'd been about to throw it away when he noticed the partial logo in the corner. He kept it, because he wasn't sure if it meant something. He set it on the table. Garrett picked it up with 2 fingers and looked at it for a very long time. But the memo had already done its quiet damage. Before the week was out, a version of the story had been shaped by the wrong hands and passed to the wrong ears. There was an outsider involved. No credentials. No obvious reason to be on that road. Someone with nothing who appeared at exactly the right moment, right when Claire Whitmore was alone and vulnerable on the side of the road. Wasn't that convenient? 2 people at the senior level had suggested through careful language and deliberate implication that the man from the East Side delivery circuit might not have been there by accident. Nathan heard this from Marcus. Marcus told him directly. With visible discomfort, Nathan sat with it for a moment. Then he asked Marcus one question. "Do you believe it?" he said. Marcus said no. Nathan thanked him and went home. That night, he lay in the dark and felt something he had spent years getting very good at not feeling. It wasn't anger exactly. It was older than anger. The specific bone-level exhaustion of a person who has done the right thing at a real cost and watched it be turned into a liability. He was familiar with unfairness. He had made peace with the kind that was just the texture of a life without margin. The truck breaking down, the math that never came out, the space heater in February. But this was different. He had gone towards something when every practical instinct told him to walk past it. He had given what he had. He had asked for nothing. And now someone in an expensive suit, in a building with a marble lobby, was suggesting that his decency had been a strategy. He stared at the ceiling until the room went gray. Then he heard it, the soft sound of small feet on the hallway floor. His door opened 2 inches. Maya's face appeared in the gap, hair loose, eyes adjusting to the dark. "Dad, hey, Bug," You okay?" She didn't answer that. She just pushed the door open wider and crossed the room and climbed up onto the bed, the way she'd been doing since she was small enough to fit in the crook of his arm. He pulled the blanket over her. She settled against his side. "Are you scared?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. He looked at the ceiling, thought about how to answer honestly without giving her something she didn't need to carry. "I'm thinking," he said. She considered that. "Thinking feels like scared sometimes," she said. "Yeah," he said. "Sometimes it does." The radiator ticked. A car passed on the street below. Then she said it. "I think you're the best dad." He didn't say anything. He couldn't. Something in his chest had gone too tight for words. She was asleep again in about 3 minutes. He lay there in the dark, listening to the slow, even sound of her breathing, and felt something shift inside him. Not a solution, not an answer, just something that had been pulled tight for a long time settling back to where it belonged. A reminder, a reason. The reason the math had to come out right, no matter how many times he had to redo it. He kept his arm around her until morning. Roy came to his door on a Saturday. Roy owned 4 buildings in the neighborhood and wore his anxiety like a coat he had stopped bothering to take off. He stood in Nathan's doorway and said there had been calls. People asking questions about his tenant in Unit 2, 1-4. He didn't know the details. He didn't want to know the details. But he had a reputation and 4 buildings, and he needed Nathan to resolve this by the end of the month. He said it with genuine regret, which somehow made it worse. 2 days later, Nathan's dispatch supervisor called. An anonymous complaint had been filed. Inappropriate conduct. Filed online. Specific enough to be targeted. Vague enough to be impossible to disprove. Already under review. Nathan hung up the phone and stood at the kitchen window for a long time. He understood what was happening. Someone inside that building, someone with something to lose, if Claire recovered and returned to full control, was trying to make Nathan the problem. Make him the variable that complicated everything. Make him go away. He decided quietly alone at the kitchen table one evening to let them. Not out of fear, not out of bitterness. Out of a clear understanding that the closer he stayed to any of this, the more unstable everything Maya depended on became. The job, the apartment, the medication. He would withdraw quietly, cooperate with nothing further, and keep moving. That was what he did. That was the only thing he knew how to do. He was at peace with that decision for about 40 minutes. And then he found the piece of metal. He'd been going through his old jacket, the one he'd worn the night of the accident. It had been sitting in the back of the closet since then, still slightly damp, never dealt with. He pulled it out to take to the dry cleaner and checked the pockets from habit, the way he always did. In the left inside pocket, caught in the seam at the bottom, was a small piece of steel, roughly the size of a large coin, hexagonal, a precise stamped marking on one face, a burr on one edge that looked cut, not broken. He sat down on the edge of the bed and held it in his palm. He thought carefully. He reconstructed the night, the minutes crouched beside the open car door, the rain, the angle of his body, the way his jacket had hung open while he worked. It was possible. He turned the piece of metal over and over. He set it on the nightstand, looked at it, picked it up again. He thought about Roy's regret, about the complaint and what it meant for the depot shifts, about the medication coming due in 10 days. He thought about the decision he'd made 3 days ago, how clean it had felt, how hollow it felt now. And then he thought about something else. He thought about a hospital parking lot. 6 years ago, 2 a.m. He had driven home from the hospital on a kind of automatic pilot and then simply stopped in the lot, unable to go upstairs, unable to sit with what the doctor had told him at 11:15 that night. Sarah, the blood clot, the speed of it. He had sat in that parking lot for a long time, and then he had gone upstairs. He had stood in the doorway of Maya's room and looked at her sleeping in the blue dark, 14 months old, completely unaware that everything had changed, and he had made a decision in that doorway. Not a decision he spoke out loud. Not one he explained to anyone. Just a decision about the kind of man he was going to be from that point forward. For her. Because she needed him to be that man. And there was no one else. He had kept that decision. Every double shift, every move number, every space heater in February, every bowl of cereal with less milk. He got up from the edge of the bed. He drove to the Whitmore Meridian Operations Building. He walked in. He told the person at the desk he needed to see Garrett. He waited. When Garrett appeared, Nathan put the piece of metal on the desk between them. Garrett looked at it. Then he picked up his phone and called 3 people into the room. The component was identified 2 days later. A modified pressure regulator, not a factory part, an aftermarket replacement, a specific type installed in the SUV's braking system sometime in the 2 weeks before the accident. It wouldn't cause a sudden or dramatic failure. It would degrade the braking response in a precise and predictable way under certain conditions. Wet roads, a sharp bend, moderate to high speed, exactly the conditions on Carver Road that Tuesday evening. Someone had put it there deliberately. Garrett brought his findings to Claire. She walked into his office, closed the door, stood still for a moment in the way of someone who has just had something they feared confirmed. Then she said, "Get me the access logs from the secure parking facility for the 2 weeks before the incident. Pull the schedule for every person with executive level access who was also present at the Tuesday meeting." 3 days later, Claire called a full board meeting at 48 hours' notice. She invited Nathan to attend as a witness for one portion of the discussion. He arrived in his best shirt, a clean navy Oxford he had bought 2 years ago for Maya's school enrollment meeting. He had pressed it that morning while Maya watched from the kitchen table. He had told her it was just a work thing. She had said, "You should tuck it in, Dad." He had tucked it in. Marcus met him at the door and walked him to the room. Several people registered Nathan's presence when he walked in. Most expressions were politely neutral. 2 were openly skeptical. One man, broad-shouldered in an impeccable suit with the total ease of someone who has spent decades being the most important person in any room he entered, looked at Nathan once, then simply stopped looking at him. As if Nathan were a piece of furniture that didn't quite match. Nathan sat in the chair Marcus indicated, put his hands on the table, and waited. Claire opened the meeting with procedural items. Her voice was level and unhurried. Then she turned to the security investigation update. Garrett presented it, methodically. The camera gap, the phone signal interference, the brake modification, the access logs, which pointed to a single name during a very specific window of time. The room was quiet, in the way rooms get quiet when people are deciding how to react. Then Claire looked at Nathan. She said, "I'd like Mr. Cole to describe what he witnessed the night of the incident." Nathan spoke for about 7 minutes. He didn't perform. He didn't look for effect. He described the position of the car, the state of the road, the wound, the 30-minute ambulance wait, the decision, the walk, the mailing label fragment, the piece of metal, and what had made him decide to bring it in instead of walking away. He spoke the way he completed route reports at the end of his shifts, in order, with clarity, without omission. He answered the 2 follow-up questions he was asked, and then he sat back down. The room was very still. The man in the impeccable suit hadn't moved. His hands were flat on the table. His face was exactly composed. He was looking at a fixed point in the middle distance with the concentration of someone counting down to something. Claire looked at him for exactly as long as it took for everyone in the room to understand what was happening. Then she looked at her attorney. "Let's proceed with the personnel action we discussed," she said. What followed was brief, surgical, and very quiet. The man was informed of his termination, effective immediately, with documentation for a formal external investigation already prepared. He stood. He straightened his jacket. He walked out of the room without speaking. 2 other people at the table found something very interesting to study on the surface in front of them. No one said a word about Nathan's shirt or his shoes. Afterward, in the corridor outside the boardroom, Claire found Nathan waiting for the elevator. She walked toward him and stopped a few feet away. She looked for the first time like a person rather than a position, like someone who was tired in a specific and human way. "I want to help you," she said. "I want to do it properly, not as a transaction." Nathan looked at her. "You already did. You had Marcus contact the dispatch company, and Roy got a call. That was the least I could do." "It was what I needed," he said. He looked at the elevator indicator. "I'm going to be fine." "I know you are," she said. "That's not why I'm asking." She paused. "I have a problem. A real one. I need someone who understands how freight actually moves. Not on a screen. Not in a report. On the ground. In real conditions. With decisions that have to be made in 30 seconds with imperfect information." She looked at him steadily. "I watched you make that decision. I haven't been able to stop thinking about it." Nathan was quiet. "Most people I could hire for this role have never had to do anything like that." She said, "You've been doing it for years." "I didn't finish college," he said. "My best facility manager didn't either," she said. "She runs the tightest operation on the Eastern Seaboard." She held his gaze. "I'm asking you to try. A trial period. No obligation on either side." The elevator arrived. Neither of them moved to get on it. That evening, Nathan made dinner while Maya was supposed to be doing homework at the kitchen table, but was actually drawing horses on the backs of her worksheets, which was what she did when she'd run out of patience for the actual assignment. He told her about the offer. He explained it the way he always explained things to her, plainly, without talking down. She listened with her marker hovering over the paper. Then she looked up. "Is it okay," she said, "to let someone help you when you help them first?" Nathan set down the wooden spoon. He thought about that for a long moment. He thought about the parking lot 6 years ago. He thought about the decision he'd made in the doorway of Maya's room. He thought about every morning since then. Every number moved. Every bowl of cereal with less milk. Every space heater in February. He thought about how long he had been carrying it all by himself, and whether that had always been necessary, or whether somewhere along the way it had just become the only way he knew. "Yeah," he said finally. "I think that might actually be the whole point." Maya nodded, went back to her horses. Nathan stood at the stove and stared at the wall, and thought about what it might feel like to put some of it down. He called Marcus the next morning and said he'd take the trial. 3 months passed. He moved through them with the same quality of attention he had always given to work, except this work was harder, more interesting, and actually made use of what he knew. He understood loading sequences and delivery windows and the small daily breakdowns that years on the ground had taught him. The things that only look like intuition from the outside, and are actually just pattern recognition built slowly over a long time by a person paying close attention. His supervisor, Elena, told Claire at week 6 that Nathan had flagged 3 separate inefficiencies in the Eastern Cluster's routing structure that she'd been meaning to fix for over a year. He'd proposed workable solutions for each, without being asked, without making anyone feel talked down to. "He's good," Elena said. "I know," Claire said. Maya transferred to a new school 4 blocks from the new apartment. Nathan signed a real lease, a full year, a building with a working elevator and a buzzer that functioned and no water stains on the hallway ceiling. Maya was happy in the specific way that children are happy when the low-level hum of tension that's been running through their house for as long as they can remember simply stops. She didn't remark on it. She just became slightly more herself, slightly louder, slightly more likely to have opinions about what they should make for dinner. She still drew horses on the backs of her worksheets. Some things don't change. Then one evening in late winter, the sky came down hard and fast. That same kind of rain that doesn't announce itself. That doesn't begin with a drizzle and work its way up. It just arrives. All at once. Like it had been waiting just above the clouds for exactly the right moment. Nathan was standing outside the operations building waiting for his car. Collar turned up. watching the water run along the gutter the way he'd watched 1,000 gutters in 1,000 different neighborhoods over the past 6 years. There was something he still found almost beautiful about rain on pavement at night. Even now, he wasn't sure that would ever go away. The door behind him opened. Claire came to stand beside him, just far enough under the overhang to stay dry. She was holding an umbrella she clearly had with her, but hadn't yet opened. She looked at the rain for a moment, the same way he was looking at it, with the specific attention of someone who has reason to look at rain differently than they used to. "You carried me in worse than this," she said. "The forecast said clear skies," he said. She laughed. A real one. Not the kind she used in boardrooms. A real one. Brief and warm and slightly surprised by itself. She opened the umbrella and held it at an angle that covered them both. It was a small gesture. She made it look completely unremarkable. The way people make things look unremarkable when they've decided they're not going to make a big thing of them. They stood together in the sound of the rain and didn't say anything that needed to be said out loud. Then the building's door opened behind them. Maya appeared. She had a half day at school, and there was nowhere else for her to be, so Nathan had brought her to the office. She had spent the afternoon drawing horses on printer paper and having a very serious conversation with the woman at the front desk about what she would name a horse if she ever had one. She had a backpack on, a faint streak of marker on the side of her left hand. She saw her father, and she came toward him at that light, unhurried jog she used when she was moving with purpose, but didn't feel the need to rush. She reached them. She took her father's hand. Then she looked at Claire. She looked at her the way she looked at everything she was deciding about. That frank, unhurried, tilted head assessment, like she was reading something and taking her time. Then she took Claire's hand too. No explanation, no announcement. Just the quiet certainty of a child who has decided something is true and acted on it. The three of them stood under the umbrella. Maya tilted her head back and looked up at the edge of it, where the rain came down in a steady curtain, just past the rim, catching the amber light from the building behind them. "Same rain," she said quietly. Nathan looked down at her. What he said, same kind of rain, as before. She wasn't wrong. He looked at Claire. She was already looking at him. Neither of them said anything. The car was at the curb. No one moved toward it. The rain kept falling. And the three of them stood in it together in the amber light, with no particular hurry to be anywhere except exactly where they already were. Nathan felt something in his chest that he hadn't felt in a long time. Not relief, though it was close to that. Not happiness, though that was in it somewhere too. It was something quieter than either of those things. It was the feeling of having put something down, something he had been carrying for so long he had stopped noticing the weight of it. And now it was down, and his arms were empty, and the rain was falling, and his daughter was holding both their hands, and the light was doing that thing to the wet pavement, that almost beautiful thing. He looked up at the rain, and for the first time in a very long time he didn't calculate anything at all.